I don't know what to say, boys. We love you, Chicago. What a crowd, baby. What a crowd. This place is on fire.
The Chicago Blackhawks were an absolute wagon throughout the 2010s. They dominated the league with 3 Stanley Cups in 6 years, making them a modern-day dynasty. And dynasties are rare, but they're even more rare in today's NHL. Now, putting together back-to-back Stanley Cups is really impressive, and it's a really good stretch of hockey, but it's not quite a dynasty. Like the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Pittsburgh Penguins, I wouldn't really classify them as a dynasty. They were just very dominant for 2 or 3 years. I think a dynasty is prolonged dominance, and that's exactly what the Hawks had. Now, it wasn't like a dynasty from the 80s, but that's because the NHL made it almost impossible to recreate one of those. Ever since the introduction of the hard salary cap in 2005, it's almost impossible to build a team that can compete at a high level year after year. The salary cap forces teams to make tough decisions about which star players to keep and which ones to let go, creating a more balanced and competitive league. See, in the past, teams with wealthy owners could simply just spend more money than other teams, allowing them to attract the better players. This really benefited big market teams like the Canadiens, the Oilers, and the Red Wings, and these are the exact teams that built dynasties. The Canadiens have had many dynasties throughout their 120-year career, and from 1952 to 1979, they won 16 Stanley Cups. Now, like I said, this can be broken up into many different dynasties, but for the video's sake, I'll just treat it as one. Through the 50s and 60s, the Habs were mainly led by players like Jean Beliveau, Maurice Richard, and Henri Richard. Then moving into the 70s, Ken Dryden and Guy Lafleur led them to glory. After the Canadiens had their fun, in came the New York Islanders. The Islanders' run in the early 80s was incredible. They won 4 straight Stanley Cups from 1980 to 1983, and they were led by stars like Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, and Dennis Potvin. They even made it to a 5th straight Stanley Cup final in 1984, but lost to the Edmonton Oilers, starting the next dynasty in the NHL, led by none other than Wayne Gretzky. Gretzky and the 80s Oilers are often referred to as the greatest team in the history of the NHL. They won 5 Stanley Cups in 7 years, and their period of dominance is one of the most successful in NHL history. The team featured numerous Hall of Famers, including Gretzky, Messier, Curry, Paul Coffey, and Grant Fuhr, all considered to be among the best to ever play the game. And after the Oilers' dominance, the Detroit Red Wings became the next big team in the NHL. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the Red Wings won Stanley Cups in 97, 98, and 02. And then came the salary cap in 2005, after the entirety of the 2004-2005 season was canceled due to a lockout. The cap was set at $39 million per team for the 2005-2006 season, with a minimum spending floor of $21.5 million. This new system aimed to level the playing field, preventing wealthier teams from outspending smaller market teams, and ensuring everyone had a fair shot at success. So this would essentially end the dynasties that the NHL knew. Teams now had to comply with the same salary cap that every other team had to, and whether they had a lot of money or no money at all, everyone was on the same playing field when it came to signing players. With the new salary cap limiting spending on free agents, the draft became even more important. Teams needed to draft well to build strong, cost-effective rosters and maintain success over time. And this is exactly where the Blackhawks worked their magic. In the season after the lockout with the newly introduced salary cap, the Blackhawks were the 3rd worst team in the league, with only Pittsburgh and St. Louis being worse. And with no change in the draft lottery, the Blackhawks would select 3rd overall at the 2006 entry draft in Vancouver. Going into the draft, the Hawks pretty much knew that they were getting a forward, as in the pre-draft rankings there was just one defenseman in the top 10, and that was the consensus number 1 overall pick, Erik Johnson. And looking back on this draft, at 3rd overall, Chicago had a lot of talented players to pick from. Players like Phil Kessel, Jordan Staal, Nick Backstrom, Derek Brassard, and Kyle Oposo were all ranked inside the top 10, but of course they went with Jonathan Toews.
From the University of North Dakota, Jonathan Toews.
So Chicago skips by Kessel and takes Jonathan Toews, Winnipeg native.
Toews was labeled as a very versatile and intelligent player who could both score goals and make plays. But instead of making the jump to the NHL, Toews went back to college, leaving the Blackhawks with nothing to look forward to for the 2006-2007 season. That is until they finished 5th last in the league and miraculously jumped 4 teams to win the draft lottery, allowing them to pick 1st overall for the first time in franchise history. In 2007, Patrick Kane was widely regarded as the consensus number 1 overall pick, and the few mock drafts that didn't have him going first claimed his 5'10" frame would be too small for the NHL. But anyone who watched his OHL or World Junior highlights knew that he could dance and cut through defenders like no other player, making his size a null factor. The Hawks believed in the hype and selected the American with their first ever first overall selection in franchise history.
From the London Knights, the Ontario Hockey League, Patrick Kane.
And unlike Toews, Kane decided to directly come and play in the NHL rather than staying in juniors. This would mean that both Toews and Kane would debut together as rookies, starting the youth movement in Chicago, and it could not have started better. Both Toews and Kane were nominated for the Calder Trophy as Rookies of the Year. Toews had 54 points through 64 games, coming in third place in Calder voting behind Nicklas Backstrom and, of course, the winner, Patrick Kane, who had 72 points leading the Blackhawks. And these two rookies really helped the Hawks out. Going into the season, the Hawks had the third worst odds at the Stanley Cup, and although they didn't even make the playoffs, they posted a winning record and finished third in their division. And this progression carried them into the next season where they would finish 6th in the entire league. Toews and Kane both pitched in 70 points, and for the first time since 2002, the Hawks were in the playoffs. This is where the golden era would start for Chicago. They didn't win the cup, but they made it all the way to the conference finals, where they lost to the prior cup champs, the Detroit Red Wings. But despite the loss, there was a lot to look forward to with this team. Toews and Kane were both 20 years old, 25-year-old Duncan Keith was becoming a great defenseman, and the playoffs saw the debut of 25-year-old goaltender Corey Crawford. After the promising 2008-09 season, Patrick Kane was in the spotlight for a different reason. In August 2009, he and his cousin got into an argument with a Buffalo cab driver over a fare that was just 20 cents short. Things escalated and they were accused of assaulting the driver and taking back their money. Kane was initially charged with robbery, but the charges were later downgraded to disorderly conduct and he avoided jail time with a plea deal. And despite the drama-filled offseason, Kane and the Blackhawks came back even stronger for the 2010 season. Kane matched his jersey number in points and dropped 88 as the Blackhawks landed in the second place in the Western Conference with 112 points. 26-year-old Duncan Keith won the Norris, and Toews was 4th in Selke voting. It was clear that the Hawks had done a great job building the team. Going into the playoffs, most of their impact players like Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Duncan Keith had all been Blackhawks draft picks. And remember how I said drafting players would be the new blueprint instead of signing them? Yeah, the Blackhawks were executing this perfectly. They had 2 young superstar forwards and a 26-year-old Norris winner on the back end, and they were ready for more playoff hockey. The first round saw the Hawks go up against their division rival, the Nashville Predators. The Preds put up 100 points in the regular season and were 3rd in the Central Division, a division that the Hawks won. With Toews and Kane combining for 15 points throughout the series, Chicago was able to get through Nashville in 6 games. They went on to play the Vancouver Canucks, who, like the Blackhawks, won their division. Kane and Toews exploded, and this time they did even more damage, combining for 20 points in the 6-game series over the Canucks, booking their ticket back to the Western Conference Finals. And in order to be the best, you have to beat the best, as the Hawks found themselves up against the San Jose Sharks, who won the Western Conference with 113 points. And not only did they beat them, they embarrassed them. Despite all the games being relatively close, Chicago swept the Sharks, beating them in 4 straight, advancing to the Stanley Cup Finals, where they were set to play the Philadelphia Flyers. The stakes were high for the Blackhawks. It had been 49 long years since Chicago had seen the Cup, and their fate was in the hands of the 2 youngest players on their roster. They knew they had the tools to pull this off, they just needed to execute it and hope it goes perfectly. Well, I'm not sure if allowing 5 goals in Game 1 is anyone's idea of perfection, but it's not so bad when you score 6 yourself. Thanks to Kopecky's 3rd period tally, the Hawks won Game 1 6-5. Game 2 was the exact opposite though. Chicago held on to win 2-1, with Niemi turning aside 32 of the 33 shots, and it's pretty safe to say that Hawks fans were excited for their team to be back in the final, because through the first 2 games of the series, the average attendance at the United Center was 22,294, while the capacity of the arena was only 19,717, meaning the Hawks were averaging 113% capacity playing at home. That place was electric.
And can you guys get any louder? I don't know, but we'll see Sunday, I guess.
Going to Philly, the Flyers needed a win. Falling behind 3-0 in the Cup final is certain death. And of course, if the stakes weren't high enough already, the game went to overtime. Going into the extra period, the Blackhawks were 5-1 in OT throughout the playoffs, and the Flyers were 1-4. So obviously the Hawks felt a bit more comfortable, but despite the stats, Claude Giroux struck 6 minutes into overtime after being left alone right in front, practically saving the Flyers' season.
Sets up Carl, side of the net, deflected, score! Giroux! Flyers win!
They carried this momentum into Game 4, where it was pretty much all Flyers. They got out to a 4-1 first period lead, and despite the late stage comeback by the Hawks, Jeff Carter's empty netter sealed the game and evened the series. Game 5 was much like Game 1, with the fact that both teams scored a lot.
Fed over to Seabrook and a shot, they score! Threw it, deflected off the stick of Lane, they score! Here's Versteeg with a shot, he scores! And deep in a shot, Niemi, oh, and then they score! And a shot knocked down left side of the net, score! All around, spike on back, team in a shot, he scores! He's setting up side of the net, play, score! The Krychek, here's Krychek, a shot, save, rebound, score! It is fed back to Sharp for a shot, he scores! Coming on across, gave it side of the net, and Gagne out the center of the net empty, and Buffalo has scored!
The game ended in a 7-4 Hawks win, putting them just one game away from glory, but they would have to do it in Philadelphia, playing against a team that was fighting for survival. The teams traded first period goals, with Bufflin opening the scoring,
The pass across, they score! Bufflin!
and then Scott Hartnell answering with a late one.
Shooting, save, Niemi, rebound, score!
And the second period saw the Flyers take the lead just for Chicago to take it back by the end of the period.
21-8, falling down is Keith, across the bridge, he scored! Meeting one on a cross, it's dealt on further, scored! Patrick Sharp! Hjalmarsson with a drive, they score!
The Hawks entered the third period just 20 minutes away from ending their 49-year Cup drought. But with 4 minutes left in the game, with everyone on the edge of their seats, Scott Hartnell evened the score off a ping-pong play in front.
Leno up with it there, Bedwood in front, it bounced in on the Costa!
And if it weren't for the stellar save by Antti Niemi on Jeff Carter with just a minute to go, we could have seen this series go 7, but instead this game was sent to overtime. And what happened just 4 minutes into the overtime period is what NHL decided was the goal of the decade.
To be taken by Campbell. Here's Campbell handing on to Kane again. Lots of head fakes there, trying to shake Timonen. Threw one in front. Oh my, it rattled around.
Where's the puck? It came loose on the other side. It's over. Patrick Kane has scored the goal. The Chicago Blackhawks' long drought is over.
There was a lot of uncertainty around this goal. Was it a goal? Was the game over? Kane was one of the few players who knew right away. He skated the length of the ice to Niemi, tossing his stick and gloves, and having his teammates join him after they realized what he just did. The Blackhawks were on top of the world, and the city of Chicago erupted in celebration. Fans flooded the streets, cheering and waving flags. Their long wait for the Stanley Cup was finally over. The victory parade drew millions, a sea of red, black, and white jerseys, filling the downtown area of Chicago. The next season did not share the same success. The Blackhawks finished third in their division and were set to play the President's Trophy winning Vancouver Canucks in the first round. The regular season saw Taves and Kane and Sharp all put up point-per-game seasons, and it saw the rise of their young new goaltender Corey Crawford, who assumed the starting role after Niemi left in the offseason. Despite forcing Game 7 after being down 3-0 in the series, they were taken out as Alex Burrows slayed the Dragon.
He has it, flips it, Burrow steals, cutting in, shoots, scores! They've slayed the Dragon!
The next season was the same story as the Blackhawks lost yet again in the first round, this time to the Phoenix Coyotes in 6 games, where they just couldn't beat Mike Smith, who posted a .950. The start of the 2012-2013 season was postponed due to a labor dispute, but in simpler terms, it was just a big argument between the league and the players over contracts and money. It started in September of 2012 and ended in January of 2013, cutting the season down to just 48 games instead of the usual 82. In the shortened season, though, the Blackhawks absolutely dominated the league. They went 36-7-5 for a league-best 77 points, which would have been a 131-point season through an 82-game average. They carried this into the first round where they beat the Wild in 5 games. Then they beat the Detroit Red Wings in a series where the Blackhawks found themselves down 3-1, coming all the way back and ending it in Game 7 overtime with a Brent Seabrook goal.
Oh my, he's run into by Bolin. Right back ahead comes Seabrook with a shot. He scores!
The conference finals would have the Hawks go up against the former Cup champs, the LA Kings. Chicago took a 3-1 series lead, and they were hoping to clean things up in Game 5 at home. This game is an all-time classic. Chicago went up 2-0 in the first period with goals from Keith and Kane. Then the Kings stormed back with 2 goals of their own. Kane then scored with 4 minutes remaining in the game, which was surely the dagger. But with just 9 seconds left, Mike Richards tipped a shot from Anze Kopitar, evening the score and keeping their season going just a little bit longer. The first OT was scoreless, and it seemed the second OT was going to be the exact same way until this iconic play formed.
And the pass!
It was only fitting that the 2 cornerstones of the franchise were sprung on a 2-on-1, with Taves feeding Kane for the overtime winning goal and series winning goal to send them to the Stanley Cup Finals. And you can't really mention this goal without mentioning that heartbreaker Selly. So with that, the Hawks found themselves in the Stanley Cup Final yet again, this time up against the Boston Bruins, who had won the Cup 2 seasons ago in 2011. The teams traded series leads through the first 4 games of the series, which saw a total of 5 overtime periods through 4 games, with Game 1 going to triple overtime. They headed into Game 5 knotted at 2 games apiece. The Hawks started strong, but Rask was even stronger, until Kane buried one late in the first, then early in the second. A Chara blast put the Bruins within 1 with plenty of time to play, but they just couldn't pull through. An empty netter from Bolin iced the game, and the United Center erupted as their team was just 1 win away from their second cup in 4 seasons. In Game 6, the Bruins struck first as Seguin found Kelly backdoor 7 minutes in. Then 4 minutes into the second period, thanks to an unassisted solo effort by Captain Sirius, the game was tied at 1.
Championship team, ahead comes another Jonathan Taves. He scores! Taves! It's tied!
Then with 8 minutes left in the game, Lucic and the Bruins capitalized off a poor puck handling play by Corey Crawford behind the net. More time passed, and the Blackhawks were now just over a minute away from defeat and a trip home for a 7th game, until Brian Bickle tied it.
It's finessed by Keith around for a beat in front. Score! Taves to Bickle with 1:16 to go in the third.
Then, as the Bruins were settling in for yet another overtime in a series that has already had its share, Dave Bolin scored to give Chicago a 3-2 lead.
Shot deflected. Scramble. They score!
Leaving all Bruins fans in shock. The Blackhawks would win the Stanley Cup for their second one in just 4 years. Chicago celebrated again as the Blackhawks paraded down the city streets, leading to an absolute all-time speech from Corey Crawford.
Fucking right, Chicago! Woo! Biggest bunch of beauties in the league. Fucking worked their nuts off for this trophy.
The 2013-2014 season saw the Blackhawks finish 3rd in their division yet again, but this wasn't a problem because at this point it didn't really matter what the regular season held. As long as they just got to the playoffs, they knew they could take care of business. And they did just that. They beat both the Blues and the Wild in 6 games to get to the Western Conference Finals, where they would play the Kings yet again. The Kings took a 3-1 series lead after winning 3 straight games. The Hawks, though, battled back, tying the series thanks to a Handzus double OT goal in Game 5 and a 2-goal effort from Patrick Kane in Game 6. But it was the Kings' turn to go to the final as Alex Martinez scored the overtime winning goal in Game 7 to end the Hawks' hope at a back-to-back. Obviously disappointed, the Blackhawks went into the 2015 season hungry to add to their legacy. The Blackhawks again finished 3rd in their Central Division, 7th in the entire league. At this point, a conference finals appearance was expected for the Blackhawks, and they fulfilled that. They took care of Nashville in 6 in the first round, and then swept the Wild in round 2. The conference finals against the Ducks went the distance, going 7 games and having 6 overtime periods in total, with Game 2 going to triple, Game 4 going to double, and Game 5 going to single. The Hawks, though, won both Games 6 and 7 to win the series and head back to the Stanley Cup Final. Chicago versus Tampa Bay, the experienced Blackhawks trying to build the dynasty, and the young, inexperienced Lightning trying to make a name for themselves. After 3 games, the Lightning were up 2-1. but the Hawks were built for this and they stormed back to take the series lead after two tight 2-1 wins. Game 6 was in the United Center, and Chicago had the opportunity to win the cup at home for the first time since 1938. Duncan Keith opened the scoring by putting in his own rebound. Then after two strong defensive periods, Saad, Richards, and Kane came down on a fast 3-on-2 break, and the rest is history.
Moving back up with Kane, drops it to Richards, across the Kane, he scores!
The Blackhawks claimed their third title in 6 seasons, making them a modern-day dynasty. Throughout the 2010s, no team was more dominant than the Blackhawks. Despite the Kings and Penguins each having 2 cups, they didn't even touch the stranglehold that the Hawks had on the league. And the dynasty officially ended after they were swept in the 2017 first round by the Nashville Predators, who squeaked into the playoffs as a wildcard team. After this, it was like the Hawks fell off a cliff. They continued to finish in the basement of the league, and in the process, they shipped out the core pieces of their dynasty. Between 2016 and 2022, they got rid of almost every single piece of the puzzle, and the one that hit Chicago the hardest was the departure of Patrick Kane. With Patrick Kane leaving the team, the Hawks really tanked. But it wasn't all that bad because as a generational franchise-changing player left, another one came in as they won the 2023 draft lottery, selecting Connor Bedard. Going forward, he's going to be their franchise piece, and they're going to try and build yet another dynasty around him. They've done a good job surrounding him with fresh new pieces like Kevin Krasinski and Frank Nazar, and it'll be no time before Chicago returns to the top of the league, but I doubt it's going to be the same dominance as they experienced earlier. The 2010s Blackhawks are the most dominant team since the start of the salary cap era. No matter what team the Hawks front office throws together, I don't think anything will ever match the feeling and the swagger that surrounded the 2010s team.
That's hockey, baby!